When I saw the long, glittering hall filled with laughter and clinking glasses, I realized I had no place there. The chandeliers overhead cast a soft glow that made the gold trim on the walls shine like sunlight on water. And there I was, seated awkwardly next to the waiter's station, a small, unassuming corner of the grand ballroom. The noise of trays clattering, servers whispering to one another, and the faint aroma of truffle and roasted chicken filling the air. It was all overwhelming. His wife leaned down so close that I could feel the faint warmth of her breath. "Please don't talk to anyone," she whispered, just barely audible over the jazz quartet playing in the corner. "We don't want people to know you're his mother." Her words struck me like ice water. I had rehearsed how I would act tonight, how I would smile politely and stay quiet, but her tone, so clipped, so final, made my chest tighten. I wanted to tell her, I gave him life. I have every right to be here. But I only nodded carefully and turned my gaze to the sparkling hall. I watched my son from across the room. He looked so different in his tailored suit, laughter spilling easily from him as he moved from guest to guest. My heart ached seeing him so distant, so polished, so unrecognizable from the boy who had once crawled into my arms after a stormy night. He didn't know I was here. Not yet. I tried to make myself small, inconspicuous, sipping my water and pretending to read the menu card placed in front of me. But every so often, I would glance at him, and memories would flash. The scraped knees I had kissed better, the bedtime stories I had whispered in the dark, the countless mornings I had made him oatmeal and scrambled eggs before school. I had lived for these moments, and yet tonight, I was invisible. And then, the first small tremor of something strange happened. Across the room, a distinguished man entered, moving through the crowd with measured authority. My heart stuttered as I recognized him, but I couldn't believe it. Could it be? I tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was just someone who looked like him. I felt the tension coil tighter in my chest when my son's wife appeared again, whispering just enough for me to hear. "Do not interact with anyone. Not even a nod. Especially not him." She gestured subtly in the man's direction. My stomach dropped. Him? Who is him? The evening unfolded slowly, each moment heavier than the last. I could hear the faint laughter of guests, the gentle hum of music, and yet all I could focus on was the space between me and the man I had glimpsed. Something about him stirred an old, buried memory. Something that belonged to me, though I didn't yet understand why it mattered tonight. I tried to distract myself by observing the other guests, their expensive dresses, their sparkling jewelry, the way they leaned into conversations with practiced ease. I caught glimpses of my son as he hosted and laughed, completely unaware that the woman sitting next to the waiter's station was his mother. My heart twisted. I had raised him, guided him through life, and now I was supposed to sit quietly and watch from the shadows. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. That same man I had noticed earlier paused, surveying the room as though he were searching for someone. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world felt suspended. There was recognition in his gaze, an acknowledgement that I couldn't name yet, but that struck deep. He took a step forward, moving with deliberate confidence, and my pulse raced. I could hear my own breath in the otherwise celebratory din. And then, in a voice that cut through the clinking glasses, the murmurs, the soft jazz, he spoke my name. "Ma'am, after all these years, I finally found you." The hall went silent. I could hear the faint shuffle of chairs, the quiet gasp of a few onlookers. My son froze mid-laugh, his jaw slackening in shock. His wife's eyes widened in panic, her perfect composure faltering for the first time all evening. And me. I sat frozen, my heart thudding, the weight of decades pressing down on my chest. All at once, the invisible walls I had been hiding behind collapsed. Memories, long buried and bittersweet, surged to the surface. The years of waiting, of wondering, of hoping that somehow life would bring me to this moment, all culminated in a single, sharp beat of recognition. The man stepped closer, smiling gently but with unmistakable reverence. "I've been looking for you since I didn't know how to find the right words, how to reach you. But I've never stopped. I wanted to speak, to rise, to embrace this sudden surreal twist of fate. But the words caught in my throat. I felt my son's eyes on me now, and I realized that the story of my life, the story of being a mother, of being forgotten, of being invisible, was about to unfold before everyone in the room. I could sense the tension, thick and palpable, like the air before a summer storm. Something inside me shifted. Tonight would not be just a birthday party. Tonight would be the reckoning. I need to take you back a little, to a time when my life was simpler, though no less complicated in its own quiet way. My mornings always began with the smell of coffee, strong, black, bitter, and the soft hum of the old refrigerator in our modest kitchen. My son, Michael, would often stumble into the room, hair sticking up in every direction, still half asleep, asking for scrambled eggs or a piece of toast. Those mornings were sacred, the little rituals we shared before the rest of the world intruded. Life was never extravagant for us. We didn't live in mansions or host parties with velvet drapes and crystal chandeliers. We had a small, two-story house with a sagging porch swing and a garden where I grew tulips and roses. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Michael's laughter echoed through those walls, filling every corner with warmth. And while money was always tight, I never worried much. There was love, and that mattered more. I raised him largely on my own. His father, James, had a wandering spirit and an aversion to responsibility that left me holding the reins of both home and heart. I tried not to resent him too much. Sometimes, I would watch James leave on some vague trip, and I'd feel a mix of relief and exhaustion. I learned to cherish the small victories. The school recital he didn't miss, the scrape I managed to heal without a hospital trip, the nights we spent reading until our eyes drooped with exhaustion. Michael grew into a curious, kind-hearted boy. He loved stories about the past, about the way things used to be, about the history I carried in my quiet heart. I told him about the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had shelved for him. He never judged, only listened, his eyes wide and attentive. That attentiveness, so rare, so genuine, was the thing that made me proudest. And yet, there was always a whisper of worry at the edges of my mind. What if he forgot where he came from? What if he became the kind of man who valued glitter over substance, appearances over honesty? I tried not to voice these fears too often, because children, even grown children, can sense doubt and feel it as blame. I wanted him to flourish, not feel tethered. The years passed. High school graduations, first cars, college acceptance letters. They all arrived like seasons I barely recognized before they were gone. I stayed steady, a constant presence, silently celebrating each milestone. And through it all, I hoped that when the time came, I would be included in his adult life, that he would not forget the quiet love that had shaped him. Then came the news of his engagement. I remember the day vividly. He had called me, voice trembling with excitement, and asked me to meet him for coffee. I wore my favorite blue cardigan and prepared my usual tea, thinking we'd sit quietly in the sunlit cafe, catching up. "I'm getting married," he said, practically vibrating with joy. His eyes shone. "Her name is Charlotte. You'll love her, Mom, I promise." I smiled through a lump in my throat, trying to sound lighthearted. "I can't wait to meet her, Michael." There was something I didn't know yet, something that would become painfully clear in the months to follow. Charlotte was ambitious, meticulous, controlling. She had a vision for Michael's life that didn't include the messy, tender threads of family history. And I had no inkling that I was about to be pushed to the periphery, kept at arm's length from the very son I had raised. As the wedding approached, invitations arrived in their elegant cream envelopes. I received mine last, after the others. It was polite, reserved, devoid of warmth. I noticed the careful phrasing. "We would be honored by your presence." There was no love, no acknowledgement of the decades we had shared. And yet, I reminded myself, perhaps I was reading too much into words. Perhaps I was being sensitive. That night, as I prepared for the gala, I carefully selected my dress. Emerald green silk, the one that hugged my frame just enough to make me feel both elegant and invisible. I styled my hair, brushed it until the few strands of silver caught the light like tiny sparks of memory. I wanted to be present, not conspicuous. I wanted to see my son, maybe even share a quiet moment of pride. When I arrived, I was gently ushered to my seat near the waiter's station. The hum of the party was immediate, a tidal wave of sound and light. And there, leaning over me with that sharp, clipped whisper, Charlotte delivered her warning. "Please don't talk to anyone." Her words weren't just a polite request. They were a decree, a boundary meant to erase me from the story. And yet, in that moment, I realized something. I was still here. I had still shown up. I had still carried the weight of all those years into this gilded room. And then the man appeared. The one who would change the evening, and perhaps my entire life, in a single unforgettable sentence. "Ma'am, after all these years, I finally found you." The words echoed in my ears, and I realized that tonight, I wasn't invisible anymore. After that first startling moment, the salute, the words, the silence, I couldn't focus on anything else. The soft laughter around me, the clink of champagne glasses, even the jazz quartet faded into a blur. My heart was drumming, my mind racing. Who was this man, and why did his voice stir something deep inside me, a memory I couldn't fully name yet? But as quickly as the shock washed over me, Charlotte appeared again, her eyes sharp and measuring. She leaned close, her perfume a mix of jasmine and something metallic, and hissed, "Don't even think about speaking with him. Just sit. Stay quiet." Her hand pressed lightly on my arm, almost like a warning. I nodded, though the urge to respond, to ask questions, to understand, was nearly unbearable. I tried to focus on my son, Michael, but something was off. He was laughing, yes, but there was a stiffness to him, a polite tension that hadn't been there in years. It was subtle. Just the way he adjusted his cufflinks repeatedly, the way he glanced toward Charlotte before greeting guests, the way his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. As the evening progressed, I noticed more little things that made my stomach twist. Waiters would approach him with hushed whispers, only to nod and move away. His phone buzzed constantly, and each time he stepped aside to answer, he lowered his voice almost conspiratorially. And then there were the subtle glances he shared with Charlotte, eyes that spoke a language I didn't understand, a secret shared between them alone. At one point, I caught a snippet of a conversation when a guest mentioned a donation Michael had made to a local charity. Charlotte chimed in smoothly. "Oh yes, we always make sure our philanthropy is carefully managed. No surprises." Her smile was perfect, polished, but the undertone of control, of warning, made a shiver run down my spine. I felt the old, familiar knot of worry tighten. I had always known that Michael would have to navigate a world larger and more complex than the quiet life we'd shared. But the unease I felt tonight wasn't about ambition or success. It was about exclusion, about being deliberately left out, and worse, about deception. The first real clue came during the speeches. Michael rose to thank everyone, and as he did, I noticed the way his words were careful, rehearsed. There was no mention of me, not even a subtle acknowledgement. Instead, he praised his friends, his mentors, and Charlotte's family. My hands clenched in my lap. This wasn't mere oversight. It felt intentional, like a silent erasure. Charlotte caught my eye then, and for the first time, I saw something more than control. There was fear in her gaze. Fear that someone like me, might disrupt the careful image she had built. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being hidden. Later, when Michael excused himself to speak with another guest, Charlotte leaned closer again. "You've always been a quiet woman," she whispered, almost teasingly. "Let's keep it that way tonight, for everyone's sake." Her tone was sweet, but there was steel underneath. My pulse quickened. I understood now that my presence alone was a threat. I tried to remind myself to breathe, to sit quietly, sip my water, and remind myself that tonight was, after all, Michael's celebration. But the sensation of being carefully excluded, of being treated like a problem to manage, was suffocating. I wanted to speak, to demand recognition, to reclaim my place in his life. But I remained still. I had learned long ago that patience often reveals more than confrontation. And then there was the subtle look he gave me. "Michael." Just for a second, our eyes met, and there was something flickering there, a mixture of hesitation, regret, and longing. But the moment was fleeting, swallowed instantly by Charlotte's sharp glance. I realized with a sinking feeling that my son was caught between his past and his present, between loyalty to me and fear of the life Charlotte had carefully crafted around him. I spent the next hour observing, noting the small inconsistencies, the whispered urgencies, the careful choreography of smiles and nods. Every gesture, every word, every glance was a puzzle I needed to decipher. Something was happening here, something beyond a simple family celebration. And though my heart ached with worry, I felt a flicker of resolve ignite inside me. I had raised this man. I knew his heart, his instincts, his strengths. And I wouldn't allow him, or anyone else, to be swept away without me understanding why. Then, as if the universe sensed my resolve, the moment arrived that would strip away all pretense. The man who had found me calm, dignified, unwavering, approached again. This time, he didn't speak softly. His voice carried across the room, drawing eyes from every corner. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you. Alone." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The first clue, the suspicion that something was off, had now grown into undeniable certainty. Tonight was not just about a birthday. Tonight, secrets would surface. Betrayals would be revealed. And I would be at the center of it all. I followed the man through a narrow hallway that led to a quieter part of the building. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind us, replaced by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the subtle creak of the wooden floor beneath my shoes. My pulse pounded in my ears, each step heavier than the last. He turned to face me, and I finally studied him closely. His hair was flecked with gray, his face lined with the kind of experience that only time can carve. There was warmth in his eyes, but also a gravity that made my chest tighten. He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing the right words was almost impossible. And then he spoke. "I never expected to find you here like this," he said softly, but there was an unmistakable intensity beneath his calm. "But I had to. There's something you need to know, something your son doesn't know." I blinked, confusion flickering across my face. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath. "Charlotte, she's been controlling more than just your son's social life. She's been manipulating his business, his finances, even the legal documents that determine his inheritance. She's trying to erase anyone who might influence him, including you." For a moment, the words didn't register. My mind spun in circles. Charlotte erasing me? How could that be? My stomach dropped, and a cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck. I had felt the tension tonight, the whispers, the hidden gestures. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. "She's been rewriting the history of your family," he continued, his voice low but urgent. "Your son doesn't see it, or maybe he doesn't want to. But I've watched her carefully for years. She's smart, very smart, but she can't hide the truth forever." I felt my hands tremble. I had spent years nurturing Michael, shaping his values, teaching him integrity. And yet, here was a woman I barely knew, quietly dismantling everything we had built, piece by piece. My heart ached, a mixture of sorrow, rage, and disbelief. I wanted to cry out, to confront her right there, but he put a hand gently on my shoulder. "Not here," he said firmly. "Not now. You need to understand everything before you act." He pulled out a small folder from his briefcase, sliding it across a nearby table. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were documents, emails, contracts, bank statements, legal papers, all showing the meticulous control Charlotte had exerted over Michael's life. Each page was a dagger to my chest, proof of the betrayal I had sensed but couldn't yet articulate. I felt a wave of nausea. Every smile Charlotte had given tonight, every gentle touch meant to keep me in place, now felt like a lie. I had been patient, silent, hoping for connection, only to discover that she had been plotting around me all along. And then, just when I thought my heart might break entirely, he spoke again. "She wanted you out of the picture. She never wanted Michael to know the truth about his past, about the people who love him. But tonight, that changes." I looked up at him, eyes wide. "But how? He doesn't see any of it. He trusts her. He's happy." My voice was barely above a whisper, though inside I felt a storm raging. "He will see," the man said. "He will. But you need to be ready. You can't lose your composure. You can't let anger or hurt control you. Michael has to see you first, his mother, the woman who raised him, the woman who's always been here. And then the rest will follow." I felt my hands clench into fists, but also a strange sense of calm washing over me. For the first time in years, I realized that I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. And though Charlotte had tried to manipulate the story, to rewrite reality, the truth was still mine to reveal. As we returned to the ballroom, I noticed Michael standing near the stage, holding a glass of champagne, laughing politely at a joke someone told him. Charlotte was by his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile flawless. But now I saw her differently, not just a bride or a hostess, but as someone whose every move was calculated, whose charm was a veneer over control. And then the moment came. The man who had found me earlier stepped forward, clearing his throat. The entire room seemed to still, as if sensing the gravity of what was about to happen. Charlotte's smile faltered ever so slightly. Michael's eyes widened, sensing the tension but not understanding why. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said, his voice carrying across the room, I'd like to introduce someone very important. Someone who's been searching for this moment for decades. All eyes turned toward me. I felt the weight of every gaze, every expectation, every unspoken question. My chest tightened. The room was silent, expectant. Then, finally, he said the words that would change everything. "Ma'am, after all these years, I finally found you." The hall went utterly silent. Time seemed to slow. Michael's jaw dropped, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. Charlotte's hand tightened on his arm, her composure cracking ever so slightly. And me? I felt a surge of emotion, fear, relief, rage, and love, all at once. For decades, I had been silent. Tonight, silence was no longer an option. The silence in the room was suffocating, thick enough to taste. Michael's eyes darted between me and the man who had just spoken. Charlotte's flawless mask was cracking, ever so slightly, revealing a tension I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also resolute. This was my moment, and I could no longer remain invisible. I stood slowly, letting the green silk of my dress ripple as I moved. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the surge of years of pent-up emotion. Every stolen glance, every whispered warning, every effort to erase me from my son's life had led to this. And now I would confront it carefully, deliberately, with dignity. I approached Michael, my heart pounding in rhythm with each step. "Michael," I said softly, my voice calm, steady, but carrying the weight of decades. He looked at me, disbelief etched across his face. "It's me, your mother." His mouth opened, but no words came. He seemed frozen in a tableau of confusion and shock. His eyes were wide, searching mine as if trying to reconcile this presence with the memories of a boy who had once clung to my skirts, who had cried when I left for work trips, who had laughed so freely at my silly jokes. Charlotte moved toward me, placing a hand lightly on Michael's shoulder. "Mom, what?" she began, her voice polite but tense. I looked at her, and for the first time, I did not hesitate. "Charlotte, I know everything," I said, my voice low but firm. "I know about the documents, the manipulation, the careful ways you've tried to control Michael's life. I've known long before tonight, and I will not be silent anymore." There was a collective intake of breath. Guests shifted in their seats, whispers spreading like ripples in water. I felt the weight of their eyes, some shocked, some curious, all waiting. Charlotte's hand fell from Michael's shoulder, and I saw something in her eyes. Fear, just for a moment, before she masked it again. Michael stepped back, the conflict on his face tearing me open. He wanted to defend Charlotte, but part of him remembered the truth. The subtle tensions, the hidden controls, the quiet ways he had felt his freedom constrained. He looked at me, eyes wide and searching. "Mom." He stammered. His voice cracked, a mixture of guilt, confusion, and longing. I didn't know." I held up a hand gently. "I know, Michael. I'm not angry at you. But you need to see clearly. You've been surrounded by someone who doesn't want you to remember the people who truly love you." I turned slightly to address the room, my voice now carrying with calm authority. Family isn't just a label or a series of social appearances. It's loyalty, honesty, and love. And tonight, I will not let that be hidden or forgotten. Charlotte's composure faltered completely. "This is absurd," she said sharply, though there was an edge of desperation in her tone. "You have no proof. Michael trusts me. Everyone trusts me." I didn't flinch. I opened the folder the man had given me earlier, letting it rest on the small table beside me. "You see these?" I asked softly, but every word struck the room like a hammer. "Emails, contracts, financial documents. All proof of your manipulation. You've tried to erase history, erase love, erase me." Gasps rippled through the room. Michael's face turned pale, his hand clenching at his side. He reached out toward me but stopped midway, unsure. I understood. This wasn't just a revelation. It was a seismic shift. Everything he thought he knew was being challenged. I stepped closer to him, taking his hand in mine. "Michael, you have always been a good man, but you have been kept in a cage without realizing it. I only want you to see clearly, to reclaim what is yours, what we all deserve." The man who had found me earlier nodded, subtly signaling that the evidence had been delivered and that the timing was now perfect. I could feel the power in truth, the quiet authority that comes when someone has been wronged but refuses to be crushed. Michael looked from me to Charlotte, the confusion in his eyes deepening into dawning realization. "Charlotte, is this true?" he asked, his voice shaking. Charlotte faltered, and for the first time, the mask dropped entirely. Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost pleading. I only wanted to protect you. But the guests were listening now. The whispers had grown, and the truth had begun to echo beyond the walls of Charlotte's carefully constructed image. I felt my heart ache, not for her, but for the pain of seeing my son caught between love, loyalty, and deception. I took a deep breath, holding my composure. Protecting someone doesn't mean controlling them. Love doesn't mean erasing their past or the people who raised them. My voice softened, but it carried the unshakable weight of conviction. Michael, you deserve to know the truth. And now you do. For the first time all evening, Michael's eyes cleared and recognition dawned. He looked at me, not just the mother he had lost sight of, but the woman who had been silently guiding him all these years. The hall seemed to hold its breath as he processed everything, the silence waiting for him to respond. The room was thick with tension, almost unbearable. Michael's eyes had shifted from mine to Charlotte's, searching for answers, guidance, clarity, and finding none. Charlotte's carefully curated mask had fallen completely. Her usual charm, her polite control, all gone, replaced by something raw, vulnerable, and unconvincing. The guests were still, whispering quietly among themselves. Some leaned forward, their curiosity palpable. Others simply stared, stunned at the unexpected drama unfolding before them. It wasn't a wedding speech gone wrong, or a clumsy toast. It was a revelation of carefully hidden truths, and every eye in that room knew it. Charlotte finally spoke, her voice trembling, barely audible over the silence. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I only wanted Michael to have stability. Everything else was necessary. Michael shook his head slowly, his hand still holding mine, grounding me. Necessary? He repeated, disbelief and hurt warring in his tone. You call manipulating my life, rewriting documents, keeping my own mother at arm's length necessary? A murmur ran through the crowd. I could feel their attention, their judgment shifting. The elegant party, once filled with laughter and celebration, had become a stage for confrontation. But I didn't feel vindictive. I felt calm, resolute. The truth was no longer hidden, and I would let it speak for itself. One by one, some guests approached. Old family friends, colleagues, acquaintances who had quietly observed Michael and Charlotte's relationship, now looked at Charlotte with scrutiny. Questions were asked, softly at first, then more pointedly. Is this true? Why was this hidden? Has Michael been aware? Charlotte's polite deflections no longer worked. The charm that had carried her through countless social events failed entirely. Michael turned to me, voice heavy with emotion. Mom, I can't believe he struggled for words, but I understood. His shock, the confusion, the sense of betrayal. It mirrored my own feelings from decades ago when I had first been left to navigate life on my own. I squeezed his hand gently. It's okay, Michael. You're not at fault. You never were. She made choices that were hers alone. And now we face them together. Charlotte finally slumped into a chair, her composure shattered. I could see tears welling in her eyes. Not remorse exactly, but fear. Fear of losing control, of losing the image she had so carefully crafted. For the first time tonight, I didn't feel anger toward her. I felt the quiet, firm acknowledgement that actions have consequences, and she would have to live with hers. Whispers spread across the room, voices mingling like a rising tide. The social consequences began to ripple outward. Friends who had once admired Charlotte's elegance and poise now looked at her warily. A few approached Michael privately, offering support, acknowledging the truth. Even distant acquaintances who had attended the party simply stared, their surprise unmistakable. I watched Michael take a deep breath, finally regaining some composure. Mom, I don't even know where to start, he said, a small, shaky laugh breaking through the tension. But I know I need to start with the truth. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not humiliation, not revenge, not public spectacle, but truth reclaiming its place. Charlotte had been exposed, yes, but more importantly, Michael had a chance to see clearly, to make his own decisions, free from manipulation. I glanced around the room, taking in the faces of the guests. Some looked scandalized, others empathetic, but all had witnessed a reckoning. There was no need to speak further. The evidence, the confrontation, the revelation, it had spoken for itself. Charlotte rose slowly, her eyes meeting mine for a brief, fleeting moment. There was an unspoken acknowledgement, a recognition that I had endured, that I had stood firm, and that I had finally reclaimed my place in my son's life. She didn't apologize. She didn't justify. She simply existed in the consequence of her actions. And that was enough. Michael finally pulled me into a hug, a quiet, grounding embrace. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered, though I could feel the tears threatening to spill from him. I didn't know. I should have seen it. I should have known better. I held him close, letting the warmth of his presence fill the space between us. "It's okay, Michael," I murmured. "You didn't know. That's why I'm here. To guide you, to remind you, to help you reclaim what's yours. And that starts now." For a long moment, we stood like that, the world outside fading away. The room was still buzzing with whispered conversations, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered except the bond between mother and son, the restoration of trust, and the quiet satisfaction that truth, finally, had its voice. And as the guests began to disperse, some quietly congratulating Michael for his courage, some nodding in understanding, I realized something profound. The public consequence wasn't just Charlotte's downfall. It was the liberation of my son and the reclamation of our story, our family, and our dignity. I let go of Michael's hand, smoothing the folds of my dress, and smiled softly. The gala was no longer just a party. It had become a turning point, a reckoning. And somehow, in the chaos and emotion, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm settle over me. The days following the gala were quiet, almost eerily so. The intensity of that evening lingered like smoke in the air, sharp, lingering, unavoidable. But slowly, life began to settle into a rhythm that felt honest for the first time in years. Michael and I spent long afternoons together, sitting in my small living room, the sunlight spilling across the worn rug and the faded sofa. We didn't speak immediately of everything that had happened. Sometimes, just sitting in the same space, sipping coffee and letting the world pause, was enough. But the trust we had lost, or perhaps never fully realized, began to rebuild itself, brick by careful brick. He apologized often, his voice heavy with regret. "Mom, I don't know why I didn't see it. I was so wrapped up in her world, in her plans, that I ignored my own instincts. I ignored you." I placed a hand gently on his arm. "Michael, that's life. Sometimes we're blinded by comfort or by charm. But what matters is that you see now. That you choose to see the truth, not just for yourself, but for those who love you. That's what makes us strong." We talked for hours, not just about Charlotte and the deception, but about us, about the years we had shared, the moments I had treasured, the guidance I had offered quietly while letting him navigate life on his own. And in those conversations, I realized something vital. Healing isn't a sudden event. It's slow, patient, built on acknowledgement, understanding, and gentle forgiveness. Charlotte, of course, faded from our daily lives. She sent a brief message of apology, carefully worded, acknowledging some responsibility without offering full contrition. Michael didn't respond, and I didn't push. Some people, I realized, cannot be part of our lives without distorting them. Acceptance doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means learning to let go. Over the next few weeks, Michael began to reclaim parts of his life that had been subtly controlled. He returned to old friends, reconnected with colleagues, and even reached out to family members he had been estranged from. Not because Charlotte hadn't allowed him, but because he hadn't seen the freedom to do so. It was remarkable to watch him blossom again. The weight of invisible chains lifted. For me, healing was quieter. It was in the small moments. Cooking dinner together and laughing over a burnt roast, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset while Michael recounted college memories I had never heard, walking through the garden where tulips were beginning to bloom. These were the moments that reminded me of why I had endured all those years of invisibility and exclusion. The simple, steadfast joy of connection. One afternoon, as we sorted through old photographs, Michael paused, holding a picture of him at 6 years old, grinning with chocolate smeared across his face. "Mom," he said softly, "I forgot how much I missed us." I smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead. "We were always here, Michael. You just had to find your way back." And he had. Slowly, deliberately, he had returned to the life we had built together. And I, too, had reclaimed my role, not as a silent observer, but as an active, loving presence in his world. In the evenings, when the house settled into quiet, I reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. Life will test us, challenge us, and sometimes try to erase the people who matter most. But the truth, like a steady flame, cannot be extinguished. It has a way of finding its voice, and when it does, it can restore even what seemed lost forever. I learned to forgive, not because Charlotte deserved it, but because forgiveness frees the one giving it. Holding on to anger only dims the light of what's possible. And in that light, I found strength, not in confrontation, but in the calm confidence of knowing that love, patience, and resilience endure. Michael and I began to make plans for the future, small but meaningful ones. A trip together, just the two of us, to a place we had always talked about visiting. Dinner dates where we laughed until our sides ached. Even starting a small family project, something to commemorate our renewed bond, a symbol of trust rebuilt. And in those moments, I realized, life is fragile and time is fleeting. But connection, honesty, and love, those are eternal. They cannot be erased by charm, control, or deception. They endure because they are real. I had been invisible once, yes, but now I was seen. And Michael, my son, had come back to me. Not just in body, but in spirit, fully present, fully aware, and ready to embrace the life we could rebuild together. Sitting here now, I can still feel the echo of that night. The clinking of glasses, the soft hum of music, the silence that followed one simple, powerful sentence. Ma'am, after all these years, I finally found you. It changed everything. Not just for me, but for my son, for our family, for the invisible bonds that had quietly held us together for decades. Life has a way of testing our patience, our love, and our resilience. Sometimes it hides the truth behind layers of charm, control, or circumstance. But the truth has its own way of finding us, of demanding recognition, and of restoring what has been hidden. I've learned that forgiveness is not about excusing the wrongs of others. It's about freeing yourself. It's about reclaiming the dignity, the voice, and the love that no one has the right to take from you. And I've learned that a mother's love, quiet or loud, patient or fierce, is a force that cannot be ignored. So I ask you, dear friends, as you watch this story unfold, in your life, have you ever been pushed aside, silenced, or underestimated? How did you reclaim your place, your voice, your truth? If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing and supporting the channel. So more stories of resilience, love, and truth can be shared. Remember, the world may try to erase you, but your truth, your love, and your courage will always find a way to shine.